Welcome to Homicide Inc. I'm Peter von Gomm. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Japanese true crime writer S.A. Ozbourne. He'll be sharing with us some very bizarre and intriguing stories that he's investigated. You can check out S.A. Ozbourne's true crime stories on Medium. That link is in the show notes of this podcast. A real quick shout out to Jojo Arakawa for your review of the Homicide Inc. podcast on Apple Podcasts. Very much appreciated. He writes, "True crime at its best. This is such a well-done podcast. The show is well-researched, and the host is a pro narrator. Each episode wonderfully engaging." Wow, that is great to hear. If you too would like to have a shout-out here on the podcast, please send me a screenshot of your comment, and I will do so. That email is in the show notes of this podcast. Your review and rating on Apple Podcasts is crucial to the growth of the show, so I very much appreciate your contribution. And without further ado, here's S.A. Ozbourne. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Your true crime focus is on Japan, is that correct?
Yeah, because I want to write about something I really enjoy, and I try to think, what do I really enjoy? And I realized that crime is one of the things that I've always enjoyed since I was like junior high school. So I decided to write about crime, but I decided I'll focus more on Japanese crime. One, because I'm living in Japan, and two, because I didn't know too much about the crime in Japan. I'd hear those stories that are the gossip kind of, oh, did you hear about that guy who cut off this guy's head? Or, those kind of super, super crazy crime stories I hear about in and around town. So I started looking up those ones, and then I came across a whole bunch of other stories that were just as weird or crazy. And so I just decided, okay, I'm going to write all these stories because most people who don't live in Japan and don't speak Japanese don't know about those stories. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. He's coughing up something. Sorry. Did you hear that?
I did. I did hear that. Perfect background music for the podcast. I thought you'd had somebody tied up there, gagged and tied up.
Exactly. Someone's dying in the back. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically I wanted to write about Japan, and the more I researched on Japan, the more I realized there's a lot of stories that most people who don't speak Japanese know about. So I decided not only is it interesting for me because I'm learning about all these crimes I never heard of, and some of them are really bizarre, but it's a good way to share, and I get to write. So it's kind of like all my hobbies rolled into one.
As most of the world knows, Japan doesn't have a lot of crime. The crime that is perpetrated that most people know about is usually pretty spectacular.
Yeah, there's a lot of bizarre crimes here. That's the first thing I noticed when I started writing my articles.
Is there any particular case that you have written about that is particularly astonishing?
Actually, I would say almost 75% of the stories that I come across blow my mind, and that's why I decided to write on them. Like I said, I started with the ones that were really big news around Japan, that every student or parent or friend that's Japanese tells you about. The boy who came to America, he didn't know the word freeze, and then he got shot by some American. So stuff like that.
Right.
Or
on Halloween night or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. On Halloween. They thought he was coming in for a Halloween party, but he was actually at the wrong house. But the actual ones in Japan, like the Otaku killer and then the Akihabara massacre and all those big ones, I started off with those big ones because that's the ones that people were telling me about. But I think one of the biggest ones that is not that popular and is actually pretty recent, I think it happened around between 2014 to 2017, was about a Japanese woman who was actually born in Brazil, but she's Japanese, but she grew up in Japan, but then when she was a teenager, she went back to Brazil and decided to get her Brazilian citizenship and become Brazilian. But then she wanted to move back to Japan because she's originally Japanese. Her roots are Japanese. But because she had chosen a Brazilian citizenship, she was having a hard time getting a job. And, it's not really racist, but you know how it's kind of harder for compared to Japanese people, for foreigners to get jobs and stuff. So even though she was 100% Japanese, because her passport was Brazilian, she was considered Brazilian. So she was having trouble finding a job, and she was having tough times. So she actually searched out a friend on Facebook and
Hmm.
kind of did like a reunion from like their elementary days because she used to live in Japan. And she
Right.
decided she's gonna kill her and steal her identity so she could have a
Whoa.
Japanese passport. And then she actually killed her, but then she didn't only just kill her, she needed to like hide her body, but she didn't want know what to do with it. So she was actually living in Tokyo, but she killed her in Osaka because that's where the girl was from. So she
Yeah.
mailed the girl's body in like delivery to Tokyo to
Oh my
herself,
God.
and then she kept the body in her house for a month, and then she stored it in a storage locker for a month before she took off to China with her friend because she wanted to start a new life in China. Um,
Wow.
and
And
that
using this girl's identity.
exactly, and that's how she kind of got caught because even though she made the passport, because she specifically targeted at the girl because that girl had never left Japan, so she didn't have a passport. So it wouldn't be forgery or like stealing or like buying a fake passport. She would just make a
Right.
passport in the girl's name with her face. It's much easier to do
Holy
that way.
moly.
And I guess the biggest thing about this, the body, sending the body, was that in why it became kind of popular was I guess the note that where you have to write what are the contents inside the
Right.
box. She wrote like a life-size clay doll, ningyo. So
Wow.
they thought they were, and it's like handled with care. And so like she bubble wrapped it and made sure like drained as much blood as she could from it and stuff, and then sent it over from Osaka to
Gee.
Tokyo. So I think that was like one of the weirdest ones I've ever wrote about.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I have not
Yeah.
read that one
Yeah.
that you wrote, and I've not heard of that case.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like a really weird, bizarre case that should be on the like top 10 weirdest list of those weird crimes, and not many
Right.
people know about it. So that's why, if you want, you can in a future episode you could definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's a very
Please.
interesting case. There's so many like twists and turns, and it's like a movie. Because then
Oh man.
it's China. She's in China, but then she gets caught. But then she's Brazilian, so they want to deport her to Brazil. But Japan wants her because she's wanted for a murder here. So it's just so much like international things going on.
Incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible. And obviously she put a lot of thought into her scheme, right?
exactly. Like she pre-planned
Wow.
pretty much everything, and then she also did, after she actually killed, she actually went to a whole bunch of things. Like she had her credit card, so she used her credit card for buying different things to send. She even paid using the girl's credit card to send her body
Mm.
to the other house. And then she
Jeez.
also, yeah, she also like used all her money to, make the passport and do all that stuff. And she also would email, text message her parents, the girl's parents, pretending that she's still alive, so they wouldn't
Right.
report her missing or anything as well, and stuff like that. So it was really weird.
That is so bizarre. And
Yeah.
talk about kicking a dead horse. She steals her credit card and then charges her card
Right.
to ship her dead
I
body.
think she had like $5,000 to $10,000 of debt built up on that girl's credit card. And she not only had the credit card because she had the passport in the girl's name, she also I think she went to the medical center and used her name and her card for like medical reasons and for purchasing more credit cards, and she tried to go to banks and try to get more loans through her name and stuff, and so she surmounted a
Man,
whole bunch of debt in the girl's name too. So it was really crazy.
incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. That's evil genius
It is. It is.
to
Yeah.
come up with that kind of scheme.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm surprised she got caught because she pretty much planned it perfectly. And I'm surprised that in China they were able to figure out that. I don't even know how exactly they figured out, but they pretty much figured out that her name and the name of and her picture or something, they were like the
Mm.
passport's a real passport, so there's nothing wrong about the passport. I think they figured out something about her name or something. So
Oh,
yeah. So they were
wow.
able to,
Well,
get her.
jeez.
Yeah.
It was almost the perfect crime.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So and
Oh,
then just
oh,
stalking
oh.
her on Facebook and stuff too. That was kind of crazy too. Like searching her. She was trying to find a friend from Japan that she knows who, doesn't have like a passport, who's never left Japan, would be like, living alone, doesn't have a family, have kids or anything.
Right.
She
Maybe
would,
doesn't have a lot of
yeah,
friends
exactly.
that would necessarily miss her.
Yeah, yeah. So she was like targeting a whole bunch of people possibly. I don't know if she tried to get a whole bunch of other friends and this is the only one that she could get, but I don't know. So yeah, it was
Man,
pretty weird. So
that is weird. That
yeah.
is weird. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show
Hmm.
was one of my more favorite cases that you covered, which was about the JAL, the JAL Airlines
Yes.
catastrophe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was back in the 80s,
Yeah,
right?
right. 1982, I believe. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Seiji Katagiri.
Yes, the pilot of Flight 350.
That is just insane.
Yeah.
What happened with this? Can you tell us about it? I mean, what's what led up to the crash? And
Yeah, I think like that's the thing. I think the sad thing about the story was like it was earlier on, so it was in the 70s, like late 70s. So I guess, you know, a lot of things weren't as modern as they are now, so maybe some things got missed. But I would say there was a lot of signs of Seiji having mental illness and has something going wrong with him. He was having hallucinations and he was acting weirdly not only with his family but with also his colleagues. And he was a pilot, so you would think there would be a lot more like care about that. But a lot
yeah,
of things that kind of no pun intended, was slipped under the radar, and like he was just
right.
like for some reason given so many passes, and it was also kind of a mix of the Japanese culture because I think one of the reasons, what the main reason was the day he crashed the plane, the day before he was actually probably going to do the same thing. He was acting weirdly and doing strange things, but it was the co-pilot who was able to control the flight and like get it back on
Mm,
track.
right.
But he didn't report anything because he thought, well, senpai, kohai kind of thing. He's my
Yeah,
senpai, so
right.
I can't like really, rat him out because he's my boss,
Right.
and so he kind of kept quiet. And then the next day, unfortunately, he tried the same thing again, and this time he was more successful. They were luckily able to get control of it just in time. That it wasn't like a complete 100%, like disaster where everyone died, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save, the flight because it did crash, and I think 24 people were killed in the flight.
Right.
And
Right.
what was weird was like right after the flight, like within like as soon as the flight hit, Seiji was out the door. He kind of just took off. He was one of the first people on the lifeboat to get out, and he pretended to be a salaryman, and he was just like smiling in the
Yeah.
camera and the newspaper and everything. Like when the media was reporting, he's like has a big smile on his face while there's a lady next to him covered in blood, and he's just like laughing. So you could
Yeah.
tell
That's
something's definitely wrong with him. So
right. That was incredible. I mean, so much for the pilot or the captain going down with the ship,
exactly, yeah,
right?
because that's
He was
I
the
think
first one out.
yeah, the policy is you're supposed to get all the flight attendants and the pilots are the last to leave a plane in a disaster.
Right.
But he was the first pretty much. So yeah,
And he
it was
tried to
a
slip in. Sorry,
yeah,
he
yeah,
tried to slip through with the other passengers and in disguise, basically.
exactly. And he was kind of injured, but not that injured, but he was quickly picked up by JL and taken to a hotel and given like medical service. So he was kind of like taken care of right from the beginning. And I think see, that's the thing. Like, I did some research, but I don't know if you know, but like a lot of crime information is only in Japan for some reason. The media only covers it for that little small amount of time, and then they just move on to the next thing. And then so they
Hmm.
don't really go from start to finish of what happened. And a lot of the crime information, like they don't like archive it either. So it's hard to find a lot of articles or news stories or whatever online. So it's kind of hard to, get 100% of the information that really happened. But through a little bit of like old articles, or sometimes they'll do like a 40 years later kind of update article on newspapers, or some blogs will have some like information. So using all of that stuff, that's how I kind of, there's always, you don't know what's fake news, you know what's not, but there's some information like JL knew about what he did, but they didn't want it to be discovered by the media, so they kind of kept him out of the media and kind of made it seem that he had died in the crash and he was somewhere in the water somewhere because he was missing, even though he had been picked up right away. So it took a while
Right.
for the media and everyone to figure out what was going on exactly. So, things like that. So it was a very odd case for sure.
Yeah. So basically, as you mentioned, he had been acting erratic,
Mhm.
and there were red flags.
Yeah, not
But
even more than red flags. He was actually like not put on leave for a while, because he was diagnosed with, I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if it's depression or schizophrenia. I can't remember exactly, but
Hmm.
he was definitely diagnosed with some kind of mental illness, and he was taken off duty. And I think he was in treatment, but the therapy or the therapist said his yes, they confirmed he does have mental illness, but they said wouldn't be
It wouldn't affect
it wouldn't
his
affect
flight
his like
abilities.
flight ability. So he's mental, but he can still be a pilot. So JL was like, okay, cool. You check, just follow the checklist. He's good to go, and he was put back on flights. And that was more than a red flag. That was like actually was diagnosed, and still, even though
Yeah.
he was let go once, he was allowed to fly again. And then I guess there was no real checkup after. Once the therapist said you're good to go, there wasn't any ongoing check on him maybe, and so just he started getting worse and hallucinations got worse. I think there was a point where he started telling his family that he's not Japanese, he's like a foreigner and stuff like that. So I think he was having like strange delusions and stuff. So and then there was a information about the army. He thought Russia was going to attack
Yeah.
Japan and start a war and stuff like that. So he wanted to
Right.
pretty much he said he crashed the plane because he'd rather die on his own accord than be captured by the Russians and, be tortured or whatever he thought was
Right.
going to happen
Right.
to him. So yeah,
Jeez Louise.
he was not all there, unfortunately. So
Well, they have certainly kind of ramped up their research and security and mental health checks.
right. Yeah, I think so. I think especially after what 9/11, I think that's when everybody around the world had to pretty
Yeah,
much do that,
yeah.
right?
Well, it's
So,
speaking of like
yeah.
mental illness. There's
Hmm.
not a lot of mental illness support here in Japan, and that's part of the reason I think why this had slipped
Yes.
through. I would imagine that if this is back in the 80s, this is like early 80s, but
Yeah, yeah.
other Western countries are much further ahead than Japan in many aspects. Equal rights, women and men, equal pay, and
Yeah.
mental health and stuff like that. Well, the mental health
Yeah.
care,
Yeah.
like the employee assistance programs,
Hmm.
um, are really very new in Japan. Like within 20 years.
Right. And only more like international companies, right?
Yeah,
Usually.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, not Japanese companies usually.
right, right.
Mm.
So it's a very new thing where they're realizing, hey, our employees need to have, support, counseling, and things, and especially
Hmm.
somebody who is in charge of an airline with hundreds of people on board. You know,
Right.
yeah. So what transpired in this flight? So basically, they were flying from Tokyo to, was it Fukuoka? I think not far out from Tokyo, he started acting weird.
So actually
And
the day is reversed. The day that he almost crashed was the day he went from Tokyo to Fukuoka.
okay, so it was a
And
return
then
trip.
the return flight. The next day was Fukuoka to Tokyo, and they were like literally like I think 500 meters or something like that from the
The
from the
runway.
actual place where they crashed. Yeah, the runway, just off the edge of Tokyo Bay. But like I think it's a very short flight, right? I think it's like 90 minutes or 2 hours or something.
Yeah, less than
So
that. Mm.
yeah, within an hour within the flight, he was already kind of acting strange. And then in the last 20 minutes of the flight, when they're starting to get the the landing instructions and stuff, instead of like confirming things, he just kept saying check, 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 and then so that was kind of weird. But then he started like, and I think the main thing is I think when he finally snapped, he took once the landing started, he took the autopilot off, and then he just manually thrusted forward and tried to go down and just tried to
Right.
like go straight
Took
down. And that's
control
when
of the stick.
yeah, and then the co-pilot and then the engineer who was with them, they both kind of was fighting with him while they were, plummeting and trying to like pull it back. And eventually they were able to get hold of the gear, but like I said before, just before they could do it, unfortunately it was too late. So they kind of like slid right on the water onto the edge, and they actually made it onto the runway, I believe. I think they like slammed into that like edge area, and so one of their wings fell off, and like it actually like the plane made it onto and damaged some of the runway too. So it actually was in the water slash runway
Right.
area.
Yeah, so it was
So
they crashed into Tokyo Bay,
yeah,
right? And
exactly.
or
Yeah,
partially into the
partially.
bay.
And I think that's the thing. Like the half of I think the plane split, and that's the problem. Like where it split is where the people who were in that kind of middle area fell into the water, and maybe they were seatbelt to the seats, so they weren't able to,
Mm,
escape in
to
time. So they
extract
drowned. A lot of
themselves.
them, yeah. So a lot of them were like drowned just from there, and some other ones were injured during the crash, and they died that way too. So yeah,
Right. The old
so it's pretty bad.
Seiji-san, he made it out.
Yeah, and not only that, like he, even though he killed what 24 people,
Mm,
pretty much because of his mental illness, he didn't even really go to court. He wasn't even found guilty. He was just like not charged because he was charged, but the prosecution decided to, dismiss because he was diagnosed with mental illness even
right.
before the crash. So there was no way they would be able to win. So pretty much he just was released. But he was, of course, released into a mental, clinic
Facility.
institution
Hmm.
facility. I don't know. I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't find any research to find out how long he stayed in the facility or what happened to him. All I know is after he was released, he continued to live in, I believe, Kanagawa is where he was living,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he had an older sister who took care of him throughout his life. I think he's still alive. He's in his 70s, I believe. And I think he even had a driver's license. He was back to driving and stuff. But like there was no real
Jeez.
information to confirm exactly what happened. Of course, he never flew again, but
Right. I hope he's not a
his
bus
life was pretty.
driver.
No, hopefully not. Hopefully he's like just at home.
Well, you know what's
So,
also intriguing about this is because there were mental fitness checks,
hmm
and the people, the psychiatrists or those who were in power of deciding if somebody's fit to fly or should be grounded,
right,
they gave him the go-ahead that he was okay to fly. Well,
exactly.
should they be held responsible for this accident?
See, that's the thing. Like some people criticize JAL because knowing that he had mental illness, they let him fly again. But then JAL also criticizes the therapist, saying, "Well, we got the okay, go ahead from them. They're the one that were checking on him, and they said it's okay, so it's not our fault." So I don't know who's to blame. I guess everyone's a little bit to blame, but I think the therapists themselves, I guess it's hard to tell who's going to do what. And maybe the therapist who was talking to him, we don't know what Seiji said to him, so he could be acting normal at times. And
Mm,
like he said, maybe going to hallucinations, and that hallucination time is different from his therapy time. So we don't know exactly what the therapist knew about them. But I would say whether the therapist thought he was getting better or not, I think the main fact was he'd already had some problems before, and other people had also complained about, like even customers of the flights had complained before because they'd had like he'd had that many occurrences, not just that one day before the flight, but even like many times before that he'd had things like, for example, he'd not land in time, like he wouldn't do the landing stuff in time, so he'd have to do a go around, or he would change course where he's not supposed to, and like stuff like that. So there was
oh,
already a whole bunch of stuff that he was doing wrong. So
right.
I think having his history, maybe if the therapist had seen maybe the therapist wasn't aware of his other record
Right, his
on
work
flight.
record.
So if
Right.
they'd known about, okay, he's done like 20 different things wrong over the last 5 years, and it's escalating probably, so maybe I shouldn't let him fly again. So I don't know
Right.
who was not communicating with who. So it could have been like everyone's kind of all together. The family also could have warned, like they knew that he's going through stuff, so they could have told a doctor who could have told his therapist, like, okay,
Sure.
the family's complaining. Like his friends, his coworkers, his co-pilot could have complained because not only his co-pilot but other coworkers. He had some times where he just like have to cancel this flight because something was wrong with him. So then everyone who was on his flight would have to like be delayed or be moved to somewhere else. So everyone knew something's wrong with him,
Mm,
but no one really said anything. So I guess it's like everyone's fault at that
yeah.
time.
Yeah. And you made a really interesting point about the cultural difference between Japan and the West where we're from,
Yeah.
where the senpai kohai thing, where he was the pilot. The
Yeah,
pilot
yeah,
is
the
a
captain,
number
yeah.
one. He's the captain.
Yeah.
And they get the final say in what happens on a flight, right? Whether
Right.
they're gonna go a different direction or whatever happens, they have to make some decisions
Right.
mid-flight to protect the passengers and crew.
Yeah.
But because he was the captain, his co-pilot refrained from turning him in or saying, "Look, Captain what's his name, Katagiri, he's he's been flying erratically, and we need to have him evaluated because he's not fit to fly, I think."
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
they
think it's
wouldn't
just
do
a
that.
respect thing. Yeah, because it's like
Yeah.
a kind of respect and also fear, because you don't want to call out your boss because you don't want to face the consequences. Because if he calls out his boss and his boss,
Catches
has
wind of it.
power,
Yeah.
he could be in trouble. So I think a lot of people kept quiet because of that. And a lot
Right.
of companies are still like that in Japan, where like you just have to follow the boss whether he's right or wrong, and it's
Yeah.
just the way it is.
Well, shoot, but if there ever were a time to rat out your boss,
Yeah, exactly.
this
Right?
would
It'll be
be,
something like that, right? Yeah,
jeez.
anyone who's doing stuff like even like doctors, who are doing operations and stuff, if you find out your doctor just before surgery is drinking or something like that, you want to tell somebody before they go into a surgery,
Mm,
drunk or something. So it's the
sure.
same thing, like when lives are at stake, sometimes you need to like, overstep that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This reminds me of another
Hmm.
case that you're
Okay.
probably familiar with. It's another airline
Okay.
calamity
Okay. In Japan?
in Japan, right?
Okay.
This one was on ANA. So, the two main
The two, yeah.
carriers in Japan are
Right.
JAL and Zeiniku, ANA.
Okay.
So this was in 1999. This is the year I came to
Oh.
Japan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And does this ring a bell? The guy, he dreamt of becoming a pilot,
Yes.
and his dream was so strong and his desire so convincing that he took over a flight.
Okay.
You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I kind of I've heard that story, but it sounds like a typical otaku kind of like crime kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this guy,
Uh-huh.
he kind of figured out at Haneda Airport a security lapse.
Okay.
Down near the baggage claim, there was an area of access into the boarding gates.
Mm.
So he brought a knife with him to the
Oh,
airport. He had
okay.
planned to take over a flight.
Wow.
And this is another case of red flags
Okay.
and letting him get by, because his counselor and his mother both knew, or at least his mother knew, that he had packed a knife in his carry-on bag.
Wow.
Yeah, and there were some other red flags
Okay.
that went ignored. But anyhow, he made his way to the airport,
Hmm.
and he got on this flight, and it was a 747. This was a jumbo jet.
Okay. So he got on the flight with a knife on carry-on,
Yes, so he was able to
like
he
slip
by
through?
studying this
Yeah.
he cut
This
through
loophole.
the baggage claim. He found a loophole at the airport
Okay.
and made it up to the boarding gate.
Yeah.
Got on, and
Mhm.
a couple minutes, maybe 10 minutes after the flight started, he pulled the knife,
Right.
and it was a flight from Tokyo to Sapporo in
Okay.
Hokkaido.
Okay.
And actually, yeah, just a couple minutes after takeoff, he got out of his seat and he approached a flight attendant and put the knife in her back. Didn't stab her, but was like,
Yeah.
"Take me to the cockpit."
Right. Right. Wow.
And he was a big time flight simulation otaku,
Right. Right.
and
Okay.
he wanted to fly a real plane, so he got in the cockpit and he forced the co-pilot out. He was
Hmm.
there with the pilot,
Yeah.
and then he insisted that they fly to Yokota Air Base, which is the U.S. Air Base. How weird is that?
Okay. Maybe because he's like into the army and stuff too, so he kind of wanted.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, so the pilot refused that.
Okay.
And that's when trouble started. So he knifed the pilot.
Ah, wow.
He
So he actually
murdered the
killed the
pilot.
pilot. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Um, killed the pilot. And there was the others who were forced out of the cockpit. They heard
Yeah.
the ruckus going on, and thank God,
Mm-hmm.
the co-pilot and another passenger broke back into there
Oh, nice.
and apprehended him
Okay.
as he was behind the wheel of the plane,
Right. Oh,
controls of the
wow.
plane.
Okay.
It was plummeting, and they were very close to the ground.
Mm.
Um,
Is this because he was hoping to crash, or he just was a bad pilot? He was trying to like figure
well,
things out.
no, I
Yeah.
think, well, supposedly after he was debriefed by the authorities,
Yeah.
he had planned to fly the plane under the Rainbow Bridge.
Ah, under the bridge.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there enough space for a jumbo jet?
I
Wow.
I would
Okay.
hope so if
Yeah.
he indeed got
Did it,
to
yeah.
that point, but
Yeah.
they were very low to the ground, and that was his ambition,
His dream,
was to
right?
so
Okay.
clearly a nutter. He was
Yeah.
completely
Yeah. Another mental illness case for sure. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
But
actually,
yeah,
I would
he
say, sorry, I was just
go
gonna
ahead.
say like more than half the crimes, right, the writing I do for the crimes, I would say more than half of them have something to do with mental illness. Like most of the motivation is usually it's how in most countries the main reason for murder is love, passion, or money, but
Mm,
in Japan it's like just mental illness, at least for most of the cases that I found. So
interesting.
yeah, it's really strange. So I'm not
Wow.
surprised about the simulator otaku. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
if it could play the modern flight simulators, like the games today are way more advanced than 1999.
yeah, for sure. Maybe that would have been good enough for him. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just it's a sad reality.
Hmm.
The mental illness can be really, when gone unchecked, or even in these
Yeah,
cases, it was not unchecked; it
yeah.
was checked. But these people still,
Mm.
made it into places that they shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know.
yeah,
I don't
it's
know if
scary.
it's like you were talking before of like mental illness is going unchecked or it's not being treated properly because I don't know if medication is a big thing, but I feel like in Japan, maybe I'm wrong, but from what I've heard, like for example, I had a friend who suffers from ADHD.
Hmm.
But in Japan, they're not allowed to give any medication for ADHD. It's not considered like all the medication that in America or whatever is used for ADHD is illegal in Japan. So it's more like oh,
Mm,
you're fine, you just gotta like focus more, you just gotta like, exercise and relax. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like, yeah, you have mental illness, but it's not the extreme mental illness where you're gonna go kill somebody. So we're not gonna give you a medication. And then I feel like that stresses people out more because they're not getting better, and then that just escalates to getting more and more sick. So
right.
maybe
They're
even though there
frustrated.
is some acknowledgement of mental illness in Japan, I think the way they treat it is maybe not, because even therapy is kind of looked down upon here, right? Like it's everyone in America and Canada goes therapy all the time. That's like their new hobby. But like in Japan,
Right.
like
If you
yeah,
don't, there's something
exactly.
wrong
And
with
in
you.
Japan, it's like it's so weird. If anyone in Japan said, "Oh, I have a therapy appointment," you'd be like, "Oh, oh, cuckoo," and like you never like talk to them
Yeah.
again. So it's like so different, right? So I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally
Yeah.
different. Well, yeah, that's like I was saying, it's still it's an ongoing
Yeah. Yeah.
developing
It's very
kind
new here.
of
Yeah,
industry.
for
Yeah.
sure.
So, which is too bad, but I mean they're starting to acknowledge, and a lot of these big
Yeah.
companies
Yeah.
are adding that to their priority, is offering
Yeah.
counseling,
Which is a
and
good step. Yeah,
it's
definitely.
yeah, absolutely,
So hopefully
absolutely.
things get better. But yeah, like I think along with that, like mental illness and just add top of that COVID, and then on top of that, just the general internet and online society and Nichan and all these things like Reddit and stuff and Twitter. I feel like all of it combined is just like it's like a terrible, it's
Oh
like
yeah, It's a
Yeah, and I
powder
can see
keg.
why the Hikikomori cases and stuff are increasing, and it's like it's scary. And I love Japan because it's so safe, and I felt so safe all the time. But I was just like, I was surprised at how lonely everyone is. Like everyone's in their own little ball, and like no one like actually, talks to people or gets out or. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's like
Yeah.
Tokyo is a big city. Everyone's all out and about. There's bars and thing and everything, but like everyone's in their own little head, and like it's hard to like, communicate or socialize
Hmm.
with anyone for real. So I can see how it gets really
Exactly.
lonely and crazy and hectic. So.
Well, yeah, like and imagine like you just said, with the past 2.5 years of the
Hmm.
COVID, people being stuck
Yeah.
in their homes, and how many hikikomori have been
Yeah,
created
exactly. Yeah, because
because of
there's a lot of
that.
people who in Japan who are also like, hypochondriacs. So they were already wearing masks every day and staying away from people and,
Mm,
social distancing. So on top of that, now there's COVID. So they're like, I knew it. That just confirms like staying away from people is the best, and then just even more, right?
yeah. Well, so just for the listeners who don't know
Oh, right, right.
hikikomori, what is that?
Hikikomori is, I guess in English would be a recluse, would be the closest word. Like somebody
Mhm.
who's like stays home, doesn't have a job, doesn't really socialize with anyone, is kind of not scared, but like refuses to like participate in society. So a lot of the times that I've heard the Hikikomori case, they have like parents who are kind of like enabling them as well. So like they'll just slide
Yeah,
food under their door or just leave it outside their door and just like send money like like they have pretty much they can live their life in their bedroom without leaving their bedroom, and they don't have to have a job or go out or meet anybody because they have a computer, they have a cell phone, they have food free from their parents set outside the door. So it's like
right,
being a
right.
5-year-old for your whole life. So yeah, it kind of.
Yeah. And and who knows when those people will just eventually
Yeah, right.
snap,
Yeah, exactly,
right?
because it's like solitary
Yeah.
confinement, right? It's like you're always alone all the
Hmm.
time. So yeah, it's scary.
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
I'm sure those are
Wow.
some of the people that commit most of these crimes that I'm writing about too. So yeah, I think I wrote one story about a guy who was like a hikikomori, who he kidnapped a girl and he kept her in his bedroom for 9 years. Um, and he hid her in his closet, and he kidnapped her, and he would get food from his mom, and his mom was not allowed to come upstairs to his bedroom area. And this guy's in his 30s. It's not like he's a teenager. Yeah, like a
Wow.
38-year-old man or something. And I think he got like I think she was 9 years old when he like kidnapped her, and then when they found
Jeez
her, she was like
Louise.
almost 20, so she was like a teen, like almost an adult before she.
And the whole time, his mother didn't know that there was another person
Well, she
living in their
claimed she
house.
didn't know, but I'm sure there were signs, but she was kind of scared to say anything because her son would be angry or something. So I don't know. I'm not sure, but I mean, she could be lying, but she claimed that she didn't know. So,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, the girl was missing and people were looking for her family, and this whole town was looking for her for like, I think it
Yeah.
was 9 years, and they finally, like, yeah, it
That's
was weird.
sad.
So, but the good news is like he didn't like sexually abuse her or anything like that. I think
Hmm.
he was just like you said, he was a recluse, he was a hikikomori,
Just
he was
lonely.
lonely, and he was kind of like, just messed up. So he just needed, I mean, I think he just talked to her, and I think after a couple of years, he finally gave her TV and let her watch TV for a bit, and so I think he wanted a pet. I'm sure, I'm pretty much like,
Oh,
yeah,
jeez.
exactly. So it was weird, but yeah,
Man,
stuff
oh
like
man.
that, it doesn't surprise
Yeah.
me anymore. So
No. Nothing's new
yeah,
under the
yeah,
sun, is it? Well, that's crazy. Well, I want to thank you
no
so
problem.
much for these fascinating
Yeah,
cases
I'm glad you enjoy them.
and yeah, yeah, I do indeed. Looking forward to a lot more from you.
Yep,
And hopefully Japan will continue to
sure.
provide you with stuff to write about.
It's a good and bad thing,
Yeah,
I
I
know.
know.
So
It
yeah.
is a bittersweet
Yeah,
thought,
because I
but
think I have almost a
yeah.
hundred stories on my on my
Wow.
profile of like all the articles I've written of true crime in Japan. So yeah,
Holy
it's a
moly.
lot of the big
I
ones.
didn't realize there was
Yeah.
that many.
So but like I said, yeah, I even like anything that has a little bit of like a twist to it, I've pretty much
Hmm.
covered.
Oh,
So
excellent. Well, I hope you'll join us again.
yeah, for sure. Yes. And feel free to invite me whenever you have anything interesting. Japan or non-Japan is okay too.
Okay, cool.
I like learning about different crimes too.
Excellent.
So.
Well, a big shout out and thank you to S.A. Ozbourne for joining us for this very interesting Homicide Inc. podcast. Be sure and check out his true crime stories on Medium. The link is in the description here on this podcast. I'm sure we'll have him back for more episodes in the near future. I'd like to invite you to rate this podcast, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. Please click the stars and leave a review if you would. This helps tremendously in getting our podcast into more ears. Thank you so much. Also, make sure you subscribe so you'll get the notifications as soon as a new episode is released. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign for exclusive Homicide Inc. podcasts that are available first to patrons. That information is in the description also. And if you have a compelling true crime story you'd like me to consider investigating, please send me an email. And if you'd like to help support the production of the Homicide Inc. podcast, you can always buy us a cup of coffee. Those details are also in the description and on the Homicide Inc. website, where you can hear all the podcasts and see some other cool stuff. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again very soon. Ciao for now.